Hi everyone, welcome back to the show. In this episode, we're joined by Charlotte Palmer, who is a health educator, qualified teacher, and MD of True Health Talks CIC, which is a community interest company here in the UK, aiming to transform the health of our communities through grassroots education and talks. Be prepared to learn the common lies and mistruths that we've been told by the food industry and how they influence society, why the Eat Well plate here in the UK is flawed in many ways and, well, doesn't support our health, why a grassroots approach is the key to changing the direction of human health, how our relationship with food determines the food that we eat, and, of course, so much more. Before that, though, this episode is brought to you by Riverside. Riverside is an online studio platform designed to record, edit and share high-quality podcasts built for growth from day one. Powered by AI, you can record in 4K video or from your phone and automatically remove filler words such as ums, as, you knows, and many other speech patterns. Built for human conversations, Riverside makes it super easy to start a podcast. That sounds great. Ready to start your podcast? Check out the link in the show note description to learn more about Riverside and get a 15%, yes, that's a 15% discount off a paid subscription. Now to today's episode. Charlotte, welcome to Raising Consciousness. How are you doing today?
I'm good, thank you, Luke. Thank you for inviting me.
You're welcome. First question for you: who are you, and what do you do? What do you do?
Big question. Who am I? I'm many things. I have a background in nutrition and food and diet. I've worked in the natural health industry for 20 years. I've been a journalist. I'm a public speaker, and I'm a qualified teacher as well. Teach art, so I do a lot of different things. I've spent 20 years in the natural health industry, and I'm a health educator, basically, health and wellness
What's
educator.
the why behind your work? What's the why behind your work? Why do you do what you do?
For me, it was part of my journey. I had chronic fatigue when I was in my 20s, and I went on a personal journey of health and discovery. And as a result of that, I started to discover that there was a lot of corruption in the food industry, a huge amount of corruption. And it shocked me at the time. The more I started to dig and dig and dig, the more I started to uncover, and the more shocking it became. And once I'd qualified as a teacher, I went off and studied nutrition. And I realised I could just go out and deliver talks to community groups quite easily because I've trained as a teacher. It kind of comes easy to me. So I was going out and I was discovering quite shocking things. And this like over a decade ago, okay. And I remember going and speaking at a little church hall on behalf of a local doctor in Enfield, and he runs a centre called the Enfield Centre for Natural Health. And he invited me to come along and speak, and I'd never spoken for him before. And I remember I was delivering this talk about how saturated fat doesn't cause heart disease, and there's no evidence for it. I remember thinking, my God, he's going to stop my talk any minute and he's going to frog march me out of the hall. I was absolutely terrified. But I was just really committed to just delivering my truth. And everyone in the audience were really confronted. Because I was talking about how there's no scientific connection between saturated fat, cholesterol, and heart disease. And I was really just delivering the evidence that I had researched, from Dr. Malcolm Kendrick, at the time it was the Sydney Heart Study and the Framingham Heart Study that I was quoting. And I just remember being terrified, thinking, my God, he's going to stop my talk and frog march me out. But luckily, although everyone was confronted and people raising their hands going, if that's the case, then why has my doctor got me on statins, or why have I had to take saturate, why isn't the government telling this if that's the truth? And the doctor luckily stood up and said to everybody, look, everyone, the pharmaceutical industry are sharks. And I thought, phew, thank God for that.
Wow. And yeah, as you said there, that was like, was that like 10 years ago? And obviously, over 10 years ago.
They've invited They've invited me back to speak every year.
Wow.
Luckily, I speak all sorts
So,
of things.
well, yeah, excellent. And hopefully we'll dive into that and cover some of that today. Why does your work matter? Why does your work as a health educator and giving these talks and educating people on the topic of health, why do you think that matters, especially in the current climate?
Well, I personally feel and know it's a kind of an informed knowledge that people are not making free choices. People are not free to choose, and I'm very, very passionate about free to choose in an informed choice. There's been a lot of lack of informed choice going on for a very long time, both freedom to choose and informed choice. And most people don't have that. And I just want to empower people to choose freely, to show them the information. I'm not there to persuade them to be vegan, vegetarian, carnivore, whatever. That's not what my education's about. My education is about having people still see what is the evidence, taking the information and then using it to inform their choices when they go shopping for food, and that hopefully will improve their health outcomes, and give them a longer, healthier life, hopefully. And that's my passion.
You mentioned beforehand in terms of corruption and the corruption that you discovered. What
Yeah.
is the corruption, whether it's food industry, big pharma, and what did you uncover and what's the impact of what you uncovered, if that makes sense?
All right. Well, when I first started uncovering, I was just looking at individual myths that had been peddled that were kind of so ingrained that it was become popular opinion. And if I can quote Barbara O'Neill, who said that we're all kind of brought up into society where we're taught to form our opinions based on what we're told rather than doing our own research. That pretty much rings true after what I was uncovering. And now recently it's been published in the British Medical Journal. Zoe Harkin wrote that the government Eat Well plate, which I've been attacking for years, was built by the food industry for wealth and not health, and it's driving metabolic syndrome in this country. And if you want me to explain what that is, that's an umbrella term for obesity,
Yes, please.
diabetes, disease, and high blood pressure. And so the food industry have been putting out adverts and misleading for a long time, really since the 1950s. And it's just getting worse. You can just go on and on and about it. And also, I would say that I don't want to be too controversial here. I'm being very mindful about what I say here, Luke.
Go
I would say
ahead.
all in bed together, the food industry, the pharmaceutical industry. If you go right back to the 1950s, when Dr. Ansel Keys had a hypothesis that saturated fat caused heart disease, it was never proven. He didn't have any evidence for that. I think he cherry picked his study, and at the time there was another professor called Professor Yudkin. He said no. He was a nutritionist. He said no, it's not saturated fat. It's sugar. But for some reason, all the medical community went with Dr. Ansel Keys, despite the fact that he didn't have any evidence that saturated fat caused heart disease. And what happened then was that they did a deal with the food industry, and the food industry agreed to take fat out of the diet or reduce the fat out of the foods and replace it with sugar. And what that caused was a lot of addictions and also return buying. And so profits went up. As you can see, it's all about profit, ultimately. It sounds very, very cynical, but if you look at it, then that's what it boils down to, really. It boils down to money. And as people got sicker and sicker, obviously the pharmaceutical industry really benefited from that financially. So it's in no one's interest to reveal the facts financially. So, no one's going to broadcast it on the TV because the TV, they rely on adverts from the food industry. So, and the food industry lobby the government as well. The government Eat Well plate. I'm not allowed to be political here, apparently, because I'm a community interest company. But the Eat Well plate, which has been discredited, is still being taught in schools, and it's completely not fit for purpose. It is not fit for purpose. It's not true. It's not evidence based. and they're still teaching it to kids in schools, which I find shocking, quite frankly. It's
Why?
2024. Like, well, we should have moved on from then. We should have moved on from that. Now that we know that a lot of that is not true, and yet nothing's happened.
Why?
Why? Why? Well, the evidence is there. There's plenty of studies to show that if you feed children low-fat diets, they eat more sweets and get fatter.
No, Charlotte, I mean, like, why hasn't it changed? Why hasn't it moved on? If the evidence is there, like, are people in government too blind to see it? Or, like why? Like, it just doesn't make sense that why
Ah,
all the data, all the
yes.
research coming out, and okay, I understand food industry, like, big pharma have a lot of control, say it's all to do with money and stuff, but maybe I'm just being naive. Like, on some level, I'm just like, surely someone in government has to put the health of us first, right? Like, I'm probably just being naive, and that's kind of and because, health is my first value, right?
Yeah.
But it just doesn't make sense in my head. But again, I'm probably being naive.
Well, I don't fully know, but I do know that either the government, I think a lot of the MPs do know, but a lot of them are lobbied by the food industry. A lot of them some of them might have shares in the food industry. I'm not entirely sure. And I've spoken to MPs who have been out on the street campaigning, and I've said to them, why are you still pushing this agenda? And and they know full well, because they won't eat some of the foods that are advertised, like margarine, for example. They know that butter's better and they'll eat it, but they say that it's not in the government's interests.
So on that point, what are some of the biggest lies or BS that, whether at the time we thought it was true or whether at the time someone just decided to make it up for a quick buck or whatever it is, what are some of the biggest kind of lies that you think the majority of people have been told when it comes to kind of food, nutrition, health?
Great question. I would say the low-fat diet. Most people know. I'd like to think that most people know now that is myth. Low fat makes you fat. If you take fat out of dairy, you're left with a little bit of protein and lactose, which is sugar, milk sugar. So low fat. I mean, but not enough people know that. Not enough people know that. People are still buying skimmed and semi-skimmed milk in the supermarket. That's a big myth. Calorie counting. There's absolutely no scientific evidence. There's nothing behind calorie counting. Nobody knows where it came from. As Zoe Harkin would say, prove it or lose it. There's no absolutely, and yet loads of weight loss organisations have based their entire company and ethos on calorie counting. And yet it's meaningless. It's absolutely meaningless. I mean, those are the two main ones. And the notion that lots of carbohydrates are great for energy. People are frightened of fat. They think it's going to cause a heart attack. Not true. Lots of different things.
What's your kind of, what's the word I'm looking for here? So obviously your work is, obviously now you're doing work within kind of your CIC, Community Interest Company, for those who are international that might not know what that is here in the UK, Community Interest Company here in the UK. And obviously teacher, health educator, etc. Where do you go to find out like health information? Like, what, if that makes sense? Is your approach very much like scientific based? Do you draw on like the wisdom of our ancestors and like merge that with the science? That's kind of what I kind of do.
Definitely, I do. Yeah.
Where do you go, and like how do you know that those people, especially if it's like more science based and kind of science based, how do you know that those whether it's studies or research kind of stack up? Because maybe in the 1950s when this doctor or that doctor kind of said these things, maybe like people believe them because they were a doctor, right? And they kind of put doctors kind of on this pedestal. So I'm kind of interested in like where you draw your health education from, and how you navigate that?
Yeah, that's a really great question as well. Obviously, there's a lot of common sense in this. How can an ancient food be the cause of a modern problem? You know, if you look at what our ancestors ate, it definitely wasn't ultra processed foods. And you know, we weren't eating margarines. They weren't drinking fruit juices and low fat yogurts. You know, they just weren't eating things like that. So a lot of it is common sense. Yes, there are studies as well. There's some very good studies, and I do follow certain I would say authorities on the subject. I'm a particular big fan of Dr. Zoe Harcum, Dr. Asim Malhotra. I think they're really great. I love Dr. Malcolm Kendrick, who wrote The Great Cholesterol Con. I think he's great. I've met him personally. Lovely guy. And yeah, I've got a few others. Robert Lustig. Yeah, there's quite a few authorities that I trust and that I'll look into. But you know, the studies are there, the evidence is there. I know that a lot of studies and peer-reviewed studies aren't worth the paper they're written on. Because there are a lot. It's very difficult to find independent studies, but I think if you find more than one study, then that's normally a good, you know, a good shout. It's normally very reassuring. But also the fact that you know that it's you know, certain cultures have been eating something for millennia, like ghee, for example. The Indians have been eating ghee for millennia. How can it suddenly be the cause of heart attacks? You know, that kind of thing. It's kind of common, a little bit of common sense, definitely.
Yeah, we'll come back to that in just a moment. On the study point, talk to us about that. Like, why do people sometimes need to be careful and mindful of the studies that maybe they cite and go to?
Well, you do have to be careful just because a lot of studies are funded. They're funded by the pharmaceutical industry or the food industry, and they want a certain outcome. So they will pay the scientists to, you know, to cause a certain outcome. And yeah, a lot of studies, like I said, have been touted as being not worth the paper they're written on. According to the the director of the British Medical Journal. So there you go. Yeah, you do have to be discriminating, I think is the word, discriminating. And if you're not discriminating, go to someone who is, you know, who knows how to, you know, to discriminate.
Do you think these people want to cause harm on purpose, or are they just focusing on because they see it as a business? It is a business. They're just focusing on their bottom line.
Yeah, just profit, bottom line profit. Yeah, that's it. I think, you know, we are living in a capitalist society, and yeah, that's the aim. Companies are happy to make a profit at the expense of people's health. I don't think the food industry or the pharmaceutical industry have ever been interested in people's health. I know that's a bold statement, but that's what's showing up.
Are you hopeful for change? And if so, where does that hope come from?
I'm hopeful for change because I know that there are campaigners like Dr. Asim Malhotra. Um, and yeah, there are lots of campaigners out there, and if my community interest company gets the funding that I need, then I can pay for nutritional therapists all over the UK to go around and give grassroots talks to community groups, and there are an awful lot of them. I've just set up a GoFundMe, actually, in the hope of getting some support from the community. And I'll be myself and my director will be bid writing over the next few months, which is I'm not looking forward to. But yeah, I've got to come up with some evidence. Well, that's
Do you
my
think
I hope
that's
that it will.
Yeah, no, I was just going to kind of ask on that point. Do you think that that's the way that we start to create change is through a grassroots approach? A grassroots approach.
Most definitely, most definitely. I mean, some people would say to me, "Well, why can't they get that on the internet?" Well, if they could have got it on the internet, they would have got it a long time ago. You know, margarine companies would have gone bust. Tate and Lyle would have gone bust. Semi-skimmed milk would have gone bust. You know, if that was the case, if people were watching the right things, you know, but they're not. For some reason, they're either not looking at anything, they're just watching TV adverts, or they're just looking at the wrong things. That's a problem. So when you've got a qualified nutritional therapist, a lot of people don't have access to a qualified nutritional therapist. It's a lot of money for them. So if you send them out and they give a talk to their local community, firstly they connect with their community, and secondly, people have the access to a nutritional therapist. They can ask them lots of questions. Get all their questions answered. There's somebody who's like really experienced and really qualified. And that's the way you do it, grassroots. Not everyone, especially people of the older generation, are looking on YouTube and Instagram for their information. Thank goodness, I might say sometimes. But in other ways, not. There's a lot of good information on YouTube and on Instagram. But yeah, it's the older people who are 50 years and above, who are very susceptible to TV adverts and pharmaceutical messages. So yeah, they're the ones that get fed a really poor diet, get a really bad deal, I'd say, a really bum deal. And they're not ones that have access to the information.
On the point you mentioned beforehand when you referred to ghee as obviously a product that has been used from us humans for thousands of years, right? I think like some of the time it's like these products or foods, these foods, like most people, I think and this is just coming from my environment, kind of upbringing, etc. Don't even know that ghee is a thing, right? It's like I've discovered so many foods since becoming more health conscious that, like, you asked me 5 years ago, I would have no idea that thing existed, right? And so, do you think like that's some of the challenge, because we've been told like over centuries, etc., that, let's use that example, like margarine is the way to go, and so then when new generations come through, like that's all that they know. Like they don't know this thing called ghee over here, right? And how do you suggest like we start to change kind of that? Well, firstly, would you agree with that? And then like how do you propose we start to change that?
Definitely, of course. Like going back to what I said about people, we're born into a culture where we're taught to form our opinions based on what we're told rather than doing our own research. So, absolutely true. Although the younger generation have more access to social media, they get influenced by influencers. People like Banana Girl, who lives on nothing but bananas, which is not healthy. So you've got that as well. Yes, no, I totally get you. Not everybody wants to cook in ghee, and not everybody is aware of ghee. Ghee, a lot of Asians will tell you that maybe their grandparents were cooking in ghee, but they don't. But it's very popular among a movement like a keto movement and the Western A Price movement. It's very, very popular. And some Indians still do cook in ghee. You don't have to cook in ghee. There are lots of other stable fats like coconut oil and goose fat and beef tallow, lard, even. There's a stable fats.
Yeah. Do you think one of the issues is being disconnected with our food, if that makes sense? Like, as I said, you asked me 5, 7, 10 years ago, I would have no idea that, I can cook with coconut oil. Like, there's this thing called ghee. Like avocado oil, or like whatever it is. Do you think that's some of the issue?
Definitely. There's not enough information. There's too much disinformation and misinformation, and it's too widely spread. That's the problem. That is the problem.
How would you suggest people become more connected with their food?
Well, for a start, use your powers of discrimination. Is that real food? Has it had to go through various processes before it comes to you? In a package of some description, or before it gets to your plate? Has it had to go through certain processes? Lots of processes. It's just a lot of it is common sense. And people are very disconnected from their food. Sometimes you can ask children, what is a pizza made of, and they say flour, and you say, well, where does the flour come from? And they say a supermarket. They don't say it comes from a grain of wheat that's grown in the field. That's very worrying.
We'll get back talking to Charlotte in just one moment, but before we do so, I would just like to mention real superfoods. Real superfoods provide the highest quality powders, blends, and bars from many foods and ingredients that most of us have forgotten, don't even know exist, and are missing from our culture today. Take their magic matcha, for example, which is made from the highest quality ceremonial grade matcha, lion's made mushroom, ashwagandha, and ginger, proven to support cognitive performance, give calming, lasting energy, and cleanse the body. All of their products are organic, and when placing an order from Real, you are also supporting the environment, as with every order you place. Real plants a tree on your behalf with their charity partner, Ecology. I highly recommend their Magic Matcha and Gut Feel blends, and their energy superfood bars aren't half bad either. Get started with Real and try their range of blends, bars, and powders for yourself by going to the link in the show note description and using code Luke Burrows at checkout for a 20% discount on your first order. Now, let's get back to today's episode. So, we've talked about ghee as being one. What are some other foods that you think that, or like from conversations you've had, that most people in the community, probably, listening to this on their train, have no idea about, but actually are super powerful for their health? There are probably loads, but if you had to pick like your top 5, what would you say that most people don't know about in terms of foods and nutrition, that they that would help them, if that makes sense?
Wow. Put me on the spot now, Luke. Well, everyone's different, okay? Everyone's got, everyone's slightly different. We've all got different metabolic types. I personally feel better when I eat organic dark green leafy vegetables and good quality meat and fish and good quality fats like butter, grass-fed butter and olive oil. I feel better like that. And when I avoid processed foods and wheat, things like pasta and bread, I feel a lot better. Most people find they do actually feel a lot better when they reduce refined carbohydrates and just take the ultra processed foods out of their diet. I'd say like superfoods are things like dark green leafy vegetables, definitely good quality grass-fed meat and fish, Chinese mushrooms, all kinds of mushrooms, shiitake, and oyster mushrooms. Brown mushrooms are really great. They're full of beta glucans and vitamin D, and they're just really great for your immunity. There are lots of different things. I'm just trying to think of something that's really great, that's really accessible. I mean, you can go into Lidl and you can buy coconut oil in Lidl, and you can buy really good olive oil in Lidl as well. By the way, not that I'm promoting Lidl, but I'm just saying for people who are on a budget, you can. I love sweet potatoes. I'm really into like different kinds of sweet potatoes. I think that they're really an amazing food, good for balancing my blood sugar levels. I really love barley. I think barley is such a lovely, great food. It's anti-candida, so it's really good for you. And what else? What else? Seaweed. I'm massively into seaweed. It is a superfood. It's got all the microminerals in it that are missing in land vegetables, and it's got iodine in it. It's great for your gut. It's a prebiotic. It feeds the thyroid. It's a superfood, and I try and have it in nearly all my meals. So seaweed, I'd say, is a top superfood for sure, definitely. Yes. And everyone should be eating seaweed. It's indigenous to everybody. It's on every shoreline. So yeah, everyone should be eating seaweed.
Interesting. Where would one go to get their seaweed?
You can get seaweed anywhere. I personally use sea greens. That's from the north coast of Scotland, and it's very clean. It's been tested. It's wild. It's well crafted, and it's sustainable as well. But there are a few different other companies. There's kind of a Cornish company, and yeah, there are a few different companies. I prefer the brown racks. They're the most nutritious, and they're considered to be the most nutritious vegetables on the planet. Kelp is okay, but it's a bit more common, and you can find it everywhere and anywhere, and it can sometimes be a bit more polluted. So yeah, I personally like the sea greens, but I also like Clear Spring. Clear Spring do some really great seaweeds like nori. You have to be careful about the ones that you buy in Chinese supermarkets because they've been fed with fertilizers. They're not wild and they're not as nutritious. So they've got a lot of rubbish in them. So yeah, get the good stuff. Get the good stuff. There are a few other companies. I can't remember all their names, but I'll give you some links later on.
When we talk about like these foods that most people probably have never heard of, like seaweed, like kelp, or a few years ago I got some spirulina kind of powder because I was kind of I heard of like the benefits about that, and then you got like chlorella and kind of other kind of more kind of supplement based from the sea, etc. Like people around me had no idea what that was, and in their mind there was like, well, I can't buy that because their perception is that these well, they perceive them as being like these kind of superfoods, right? And that they're really, really expensive, and like I'm on a budget, and then we even talk about quality meat and poultry and fish, etc. I feel personally sometimes the money barrier, while I know that people are struggling, is sometimes a little bit of an excuse as well. I don't know if you would agree or disagree with that, because like when I went into a when I went into a supermarket, right, I was able to get quite a lot of fruit, and then I went up the crisp aisle, right, and compared the prices, and I was like, actually, like, I actually got all this, like, all this fruit, and like, I think it's some vegetables as well, and it would like cost the equivalent of a few bags of crisps, right? But the fruit would last me way longer and more nutritious. I'm prioritizing eating for nutrition. So a lot of things there, maybe not true in every case, because obviously sometimes if you go to fast food restaurants, they have like these crazy meal deals, etc. But what's your thoughts, opinions, experience? What have you seen kind of on the ground with that?
Firstly, what you spend your money on, it's all about prioritizing it. Some people will spend a lot of money on hair, makeup, or designer clothes, or alcohol or fags, and then go, well, I haven't got enough money to buy good food. But good food doesn't have to cost that much, and you can prioritize. You can go, okay, well, I'm not going to go and spend like 90 quid on a new pair of trainers. I mean, if you don't make time for your health now, your health could force you to make time for it later on in life, and it could end up costing you a lot more as well if you don't really prioritize your health. And it's about perceived value. It's like what you put your value on. You can still eat good food and not be too expensive. You can still go to Lidl and buy an organic chicken. You can cook that chicken, eat the meat, and then use the carcass to make a bone broth, and then make a soup out of it. So it's really good value. That chicken could last you the week, really. And it's not that expensive. You can get things. You can get things. Good quality stuff. And it's just about, again, being discriminating. Everyone has got enough money to buy something. You don't have to be eating meat every single day. And you can get cheap things in supermarkets and at farmers markets as well. If you go to farmers markets, you can get a massive big bag of leafy greens or a huge big cabbage. It will last you all week. It's only cost you £3. So I mean, I don't know, it only becomes expensive if you're buying loads of takeaways and loads of, takeaways are really expensive actually. And loads of processed food and ready-made meals, they're really expensive. So I do think it's just about the way you prioritize your money. And I get that it doesn't occur as being a middle class eating well, but you can eat well on a budget. I've done it myself.
What would you say with the time excuse? Like, oh, Charlotte, Charlotte, like, I'll go to a farmer's market, and then I got to research how to make bone broth, and then I got to cook a soup. Like, nah, I just buy a processed soup that's kind of like on the supermarket shelves. It's kind of got all this added sugar in. It sounds to me like we're with both potential excuses money or time.
Yeah.
It's like a mindset shifter that needs to happen for people if they really are
100%.
serious about their health. Maybe a
Yeah,
bit of
I
a
agree
dumb
with you.
question. Yeah, maybe a bit of a dumb
Yeah.
question. Like, how do you have any recommendations on how people shift to that mindset? Like, what?
Well, the first thing I'd say is, would you put vegetable oil in a really top motor car? If you had a really beautiful Porsche or whatever it is that, you know, what's the latest, like, groovy, really cool car at the moment? Whatever that is, would you put vegetable oil in it? And you go, no, I'd put the best petrol I can find in it, right? That's the first thing, you know? And, you know, I mean, if you don't, you have to look at yourself as like you're worth it. You know, it's all about self-esteem. You know, so I'm worth good quality food. You know, I'm worth a good diet. And people don't always value themselves. They don't see that as they don't put their health first. But if they don't, they will end up paying for it later on in life. And yeah, like people's mindsets need to change, because people are often trapped in a vicious cycle of eating for comfort and eating because they're bored. And ultra processed food is very, very addictive. But as soon as you can stop that addictive cycle and notice why you're eating it, and you look at like that area of your life that you're using it to cover up, then sometimes you can break the cycle. So, you know, it's not always about, well, when I've got enough money, that's when I can start my good quality diet. It's in the UK consciousness whereby we nobody wakes up in the morning and says, I know, today I'm going to transform my diet, I'm going to transform my life, and I'm going to change all my bad habits to prevent any you know, potential risk of a negative health outcome. When does that ever happen? People don't. People come staggering in blindly into a health food store after they've had a devastating diagnosis from the doctor, telling them they're borderline diabetic, or they're diabetic, or they've got 3 months to live, and they come staggering in overweight and tired, no quality of life at all, and they come in and they say, I need help. But they would never have done that prior to being told. And it's the shock. It's shock that interrupts the neuron patterns that go backwards and forwards, and you're stuck in a pattern. You're stuck in a habit. And the only way that people's habits can sometimes be stopped is through a crisis. And it's a real shame, I think. Don't you think? It's a real shame that we have to get to that point before we'll make a change.
No, totally. And I think like one reason, or like one of the reasons why I kind of do what I do is to try and help people before getting to that point, because okay, we're not all perfect, and there's probably areas in my life where like I'm kind of neglecting in some way. But when it comes to my health, it's like trying to be as health conscious as I can, because like that's the only thing that we have, And so yeah,
Health is,
it's interesting.
yeah, health is wealth, as they say. Definitely. If you don't have your health, what have you got, really?
Do you think it's hard for people in the current landscape? Like they go into the supermarket and they've got like all this marketing around them. They go home, they're on social media, they turn on the TV. There's like all this marketing from big food, but from big pharma, etc. And they're like programmed in this way to like believe the adverts. Like even some more quote unquote healthier brands I kind of noticed. And then you turn over the package and you look at the ingredients and you're like, oh fuck, And like the one message I'm trying to share mostly within my kind of my family circles, etc., is even with what we would perceive as more healthier food brands or companies, it's all just marketing, right? It's all just noise. And I think once we
Yeah,
understand that, we can navigate it better. Is that what you're seeing, or are you
for sure.
seeing something different?
I would say, Luke, that the word healthy eating has been hijacked by the food industry. I'd say it means absolutely nothing to most people. It means something different to everybody. Healthy eating. What does it mean? It's a kind of empty, meaningless word, really, isn't it? Healthy, healthy food. You know, people are completely and utterly influenced by the food industry. That is the problem, and that is the point of my community interest company. And that is why we have to go out grassroots and educate people and help. And with people power, people can vote with their wallets, and we can send these corrupt ultra processed food companies into bankruptcy. And that is my aim. It sounds awful, doesn't it? I don't wish anything bad on anyone, but I do think that these awful ultra processed companies, they need to go bankrupt, and we can do it with people power. And I do think, and the only way we can do it is by going out grassroots and speaking. I've been doing it for over 10 years now, to groups and groups, to community groups, and educating people and telling them and picking through every single process that it takes to make margarine, with all the chemicals in it and all the fractionation and the degumming and the bleaching and the hydronation, all the different chemical processes, and then all the synthetic ingredients that go into making it. And then once we've gone through the margarine, we can go through all the awful ingredients that are in processed bread, picking it apart, all the soya flour and the vegetable oils and the sugars and the industrial yeasts and the flour improvers, all of that stuff.
When you check the food labels, so I do enjoy some sourdough bread, but the bread that I get is 3 ingredients, right? So it's like sourdough starter, I think it's like water and maybe a pinch of salt or something, and I get it from a local bread maker. Like you can see them making it, right? So like I'm quite close to them actually making it. And then I went into supermarket and I learned on the ingredients, and it's like all these ingredients, right? And I'm like, what? Like, why do they need this in there? Like sugar and it's like, why do they need all of this in there? And yeah, it's just crazy. Like, I think one biggest thing that has helped me to become more conscious around food and health is just checking the ingredient labels.
For sure. And you know why they put those ingredients in there, Luke? It's to prolong shelf life so they can make more profit. Yeah.
Yeah. Going back to
really
the grassroots. Yeah. Going back to the grassroots approach, I'm interested with this. So, what, obviously with your CIC company, what is the step-by-step grassroots approach to start to undo some of what we've been talking about today, start to create change? Have you kind of thought through like a step-by-step approach, or just like a general approach? Like, what does that grassroots approach actually in the detail look like?
Well, personally, I've been literally emailing and calling up local community support groups. I've seen them advertised on the board in the co-op, the local Parkinson support group, or I've been invited to Chase Farm Hospital to speak at the diabetic support centre there. And also I've built up loads of connections in my community and the community around London. And I know that when I spoke to a nutritional therapist up in Scotland, she's Irish, and she said it was interesting that I contacted her. She said because she was looking for different ways to outreach to her community. And she has agreed she's got a background in corporate training, and she's also qualified nutritional therapist, and she's got all the kind of the materials that she needs. She can just get in her car and go out to small community groups, church halls, diabetic support groups, Parkinson's support groups. They're all over the UK. You just have to go to the Parkinson's UK members website, and it has all the local community groups and their numbers and emails on there. You just email them with a little. I just have like a little kind of a bio of me going, hello, my name's Charlotte. I've studied nutrition. I'm a public speaker, and I'd love to come and speak to your group, and and just invite myself. And now normally I've never had anyone say no. I've had a few not respond, but I've mainly had everyone go, yes, please come and give us a talk. They all love guest speakers. A lot of these groups have guest speakers. So I go and I speak, and they're great. They enjoy the talk. You've got a committed, who doesn't love a committed listener? I've got a whole group of committed listeners, and I go through all the ways that the food industry have been misleading them, and also give them some really good tips about how to elevate their health to the next level. And I have a particular interest in Parkinson's. I've watched Colin Potter in his interview, how he's reversed all of his symptoms with diet. And so therefore it's doable, so there's hope there. And I don't want to give people false hope, but I want to give them some positivity and practical tools and ways in which they can go forth and improve their health, take it to the next level. So I've got nutritional therapists. I've got a lady up in Scotland who's willing to drive out around Aberdeenshire and Dundee. I've got a lady down in Wales who runs a naturopathic college, and she's willing to do Wales or parts of Wales. And I've got a lady down in Sussex as well who's a nutritional therapist called Janine from Medicinal Eating, and she's willing to do all of her area, and she's got all sorts of things that she'd love to do with her community. But I've got to fund all this. I've got to get some funding. So it's it's a challenge, but it's got to happen. It's got to happen. I personally have been doing these talks for free for a long time. I very rarely got paid. I've been paid a couple of times, I'd say, in all the time that I've been doing them.
It sounds like your passion for it, and passion for helping people and to get this information out is driving you through. When we're so passionate about what we do, sometimes like, okay, great, we do need to pay the bills, and being paid would be great, but it's almost like the mission in some case like also comes first. And I think sometimes it's finding that balance, right, between like, actually I do need to pay the bills, but also like this information has to get out there, and like when we are mission driven, that's sometimes the challenge.
Absolutely.
We can
yeah, I'll pretty much go anywhere and speak to any group about anything, really, if I get invited, within my capacity, of course. I can't talk about brain surgery or whatever, or car mechanics, but I can talk about general areas of wellness. And I was speaking at Excel at the Professional Beauty a couple of weeks ago, and I was speaking at the Leytonstone festival to the Residents Association. They did pay me, luckily. Sometimes I get paid, but not most of the time. I don't. With community support groups, we need funding basically, because they can't finance it.
Going back to the tools you mentioned earlier, you said to give people the tools. So for our listeners, watchers, viewers, audience who are listening to this, what are a couple of tools that you would share with them to go away and kind of implement from this episode?
Okay, I would say sourdough your bread. Only eat sourdough bread, as you were doing. I would say avoid low-fat foods as much as you can. And I would say take sugar out of your diet. Avoid sugar at all costs. Sugar is very, very inflammatory and not good for your gut at all. Yeah, and try to get your food from good sources, and
do you have any tips on how they get their food from good sources? Is that prioritize farmers markets if they can, or organic over non-organic? Like, what tips do you have there?
I would say farmers market is ideal. If you can't get to one, it's not in your area. All the supermarkets will have an organic range. And even Lidl has organic broccoli. It has organic carrots and sometimes potatoes. So Lidl does have organic foods. So whatever your budget is, you can go to Waitrose, you can go to Sainsbury's, Asda, you name it. There will be a section, but ideally the farmers market, because the food's just been picked, it hasn't been sitting around on the shelf for weeks on end, and it'll be much more nutritious, and you're paying the money directly to the farmer rather than to a big conglomerate, a big corporation, which is not ideal. Again, grassroots people power. And if we don't support farmers markets, they will be a thing of the past. They won't continue. We'll just lose them. So it's important that we do. Very, very important that we do. And they're not that expensive.
Charlotte, what's one thing today that we haven't spoken about that we should have spoken about when it comes to the topics that we have discussed?
Oh my goodness. There's loads. There's loads. I would say don't feel fearful and don't feel worried if you don't have enough money or that your health is failing. Just make some small changes, do what you can in the time, within your capacity. And yeah, don't be influenced too much by the food industry and adverts. Just use your intuition. It's very important. And I'd love to talk more generally just about how we use food to cover up boredom or unfulfillment in life. It is a big element of that. But I did mention it, so I don't need to go on about it.
No, I think that's a big thing, and kind of touching on that, I think that kind of goes back to our relationship with food as well. I think people like just even when I say that, you tell me like 10 years ago, 7 years ago, 5 years ago, whatever, that we have a relationship with food. Like, I don't think it's something we consciously understand or think about or recognize, because it's like, I think it's like one of those subconscious things. So how have you, I don't know if you've needed to, but how have you improved your relationship with food, and how would you recommend other people improve their relationship with food so that they don't just eat for boredom, right? Because I think that's kind of where that conversation comes in.
Well, food is fuel. Food is there for fuel, and it's to nourish us, to give us energy. It's to make us feel good. And I have. It's about noticing it when you do it. That's the first thing. When you notice it and you say, "Ooh, I've just eaten this because I'm feeling really unfulfilled at work or in my relationship, or I'm bored," then that's the first step into having more control and power over what you eat. And also, when you start to eat more fat and protein and dark green leafy vegetables, less chance of you wanting to eat kind of foods that upset your blood sugar levels. So yeah, I started to make sure that I was having a proper breakfast. Having a good quality fat and protein rich breakfast keeps my blood sugar levels balanced for the day, and I'm less likely to eat processed foods later on in the day. Studies have been done that show that if you have a high carbohydrate breakfast, you're more likely to eat more refined calorific food later on in the day.
Well, Charlotte, thank you for your time today. It's been a pleasure. Where do people go if they want to keep up to date with what you're doing? Obviously, support your CIC. I will link the GoFund, if I can talk, GoFundMe page in the show notes below. But yeah, where can they go if they want to keep up to date with your work and support your grassroots approach, which I think is very much needed?
Okay, I run a Facebook page called a Facebook group called Busting Food and Diet Myths, and it's free to join. Anyone can join it, and it's all the up-to-date research. I have a website called truehealthtalks.co.uk, and I have a GoFundMe page as well, which again is True Health Talks, Grassroots Talk. But I will send you the link.
Excellent. Well, Charlotte, thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure for me too. Thank you so much for your listening.
I hope that you've enjoyed my conversation today with Charlotte Palmer, as we've been discussing the food industry and why a grassroots approach is key to changing the direction of human health. This is the work that Charlotte is doing and is very much needed. What are you taking away from this episode, and what positive changes are you going to make as a result? Leave a comment or review below this episode, whether you're watching on YouTube, listening on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, or wherever else you get your podcasts from. I read every comment and review and appreciate you being here. I look forward to sharing the next episode of the show with you really soon. See you there.